Gronsko is the same, but the world has changed. When Donald Trump says that Russia and China are pushing into Greenland, it's not about any impending invasion or a secret plan to occupy the island. It's about something much less visible, but strategically much more important. It's about the fact that the space the United States has considered a given for decades is no longer empty. Russia is expanding its military presence in the northern latitudes. China is quietly building economic and political ties there. And the United States is suddenly realizing that Greenland is no longer just a distant piece of ice, but a sensitive point in the shifting balance of power. This video isn't about who's right. It's about what the major powers are actually doing there and why Greenland has become the center of their attention. For decades, Greenland was a strategic given, an island that was important but undisputed. The United States had a presence here, the West had oversight, and the North Atlantic functioned as a stable background, not as a space for competition. Greenland wasn't talked about because it wasn't a problem. That's changing today. Not because Greenland itself has changed, but because its surroundings are changing. In an area that for many years was seen as the periphery of the world, new players are starting to appear. Not openly, not confrontationally, but systematically. Greenland lies between North America and Europe. It controls access to the North Atlantic airspace and routes that for generations were considered the secure hinterland of the West. When this area was under the control of a single actor, there was no reason to address it. But when others appear, that ends. Greenland now re-enters the global political stage, not as a target, but as a place where three great powers' interests intersect. Each of them approaches it differently, each has a different strategy, but the result is the same. The island, which for years was a stable point, is turning into a sensitive node. To understand why Greenland is now being talked about in terms of pressure and concerns, we first need to look at what Russia is doing, not directly on the island, but in the area around it. Are you watching the Beyond Borders channel? Let's begin. What is Russia doing outside of Greenland, but not out of the game? Russia is not building bases in Greenland today. It does not make any claims and does not officially suggest that it wants to bring it under its control. If we looked only at the island itself, it might seem that Moscow is not present in this game at all. But that would be a mistake. Russia's strategy is not taking place in Greenland, but around it. In the northern latitudes, Russia has significantly strengthened its ability to operate, both militarily and logistically, in recent years. It has rebuilt post-Cold War infrastructure, expanded radar coverage, and returned to areas the West had gradually left. These are not symbolic steps, but the creation of a real presence. From the United States perspective, it's especially important that Russia can now monitor and influence the North Atlantic area from much farther away. This area is not just a geographical zone, but a key link between America and Europe. Anything that increases uncertainty in this area automatically increases the importance of the points that control it. And Greenland is one of them. The key point is the Russian advance appears to be a gradual return, not a sudden escalation. Russia is acting like a player that never really left the region and is now just reoccupying space it considers natural. It's precisely this smoothness that makes its moves hard to challenge, but at the same time strategically unsettling for others. For the United States, this is simple. Even though Russia doesn't want Greenland, it's changing the conditions around it. And in geopolitics, it's often true that controlling the area around a target can be more important than the target itself. Greenland is relevant not because Moscow wants to acquire it, but because it's in a region Russia no longer sees as solely Western. But Russia isn't the only player approaching this area. In a completely different way, more quietly and less visibly, China is doing it too. What is China doing? Directly in Greenland, but quietly. China does not approach Greenland as a military player. It doesn't have bases there, it doesn't move troops there, and it doesn't speak the language of security threats. That's exactly why its presence often goes unnoticed. But in the long run, it may be even more interesting than Russia's approach. Beijing is getting closer to Greenland through the economy, research, and infrastructure. It is interested in raw materials, logistics, and political ties with local actors. It's no coincidence that China calls itself a near-Arctic state. It's about ambition, not geography. It's about the effort to be present in a space that's becoming a strategic hub for the future. From Greenland's perspective, Chinese activities are often presented as investment opportunities. For such a sparsely populated country, it's about real money, jobs, and development. From the United States perspective, it's different. It's the first step toward political influence in a region previously part of their security zone. It's important to say what China is not doing. It's not preparing occupations. It's not pushing for border changes. And it's not acting confrontationally. Its strategy is patient and long-term, testing its limits. It observes reactions, builds relationships that today seem economic but tomorrow may also have political significance. That's where the sensitivity of China's presence in Greenland lies. It's not about a single project, but a trend. The fact is that a new player with a completely different approach is entering a space that was closed and predictable for decades. And for the United States, this may be an even more complex challenge than Russian military capabilities. While Russia is changing the balance in the area around Greenland, China is gradually entering its political and economic environment. And at this point, it's impossible to understand Washington's reaction without also looking at what the United States itself is doing, what the United States of America is doing. And why is this not news? The United States has long been involved in Greenland. Actually, they've been there the longest. Their presence is not a reaction to Russia or China, but part of a long-term security architecture that was established during the Cold War. That's why American actions are often taken for granted, not seen as something that needs to be explained. From Washington's perspective, Greenland is a key point for monitoring the northern region. It enables control of air and missile paths, early warning, and monitoring movement in the North Atlantic. These are technical, not political arguments. The United States views Greenland as part of its own security perimeter, not as foreign territory in the traditional sense. But the essential thing is not what the United States is doing, but what has changed around them. The American presence in Greenland was unrivaled for many years. There was no other major player with the capacity or ambition to enter this space. It was precisely this exclusivity that created a sense of stability. When you are not being challenged, you don't have to respond. Today, the situation is different. Russia is strengthening its capabilities in the northern region, and China is starting to appear directly in Greenland's economic environment. The United States isn't doing anything fundamentally new, but for the first time in decades, they are no longer alone in the region. And that changes the way they look at Greenland. From this view, who came first no longer matters. What matters is that the balance on which the American strategy was built is starting to shift. Greenland isn't changing because the United States of America suddenly became interested in it. It's changing because the environment the United States once saw as a natural stronghold is shifting. This shift is exactly why Greenland is being discussed more today than ever. Not as a target, but as an insurance policy in a space that is no longer clear-cut. The Arctic in the background. What has actually changed? To make it clear why Greenland is being discussed so intensely today, we need to take a step back, not to the island's history, but to the environment it is in. The Arctic has stopped being an empty space where nothing significant happens. Not overnight, not dramatically, but gradually and quietly. Activity in this area has increased recently. More movement, more infrastructure, more interest. Some countries have always been there, others are coming for the first time. As a result, a region long seen as stable is now where great powers must consider each other. That is a fundamental change. Geopolitics operates not just on intentions, but also on possibilities. When the number of actors in one space increases, uncertainty grows, even if no one is interested in conflict. Every move by one player is automatically read as a signal by the others. Greenland fits exactly into this picture. It lies on a boundary that has long been peaceful precisely because it was controlled by one side. As this one-sidedness fades, the points that ensured it are gaining new significance. Not because their location changed, but because the context did. That's why saying the Arctic is far away and inhospitable is no longer enough. There are no empty spaces in geopolitics. Only places that have not yet become contested, and it is precisely at this point that the Arctic, and with it Greenland, is moving from the edge of the map to the center of attention. This shift does not automatically mean conflict. However, it does mean that every actor starts to think more defensively. And this is exactly where we come to the question of why these parallel moves by Russia, China, and the United States of America are increasing tensions, even though none of the sides are talking about war. Why are these steps raising tensions? The tension around Greenland isn't arising because any of the great powers is about to take a radical step. It's happening for the opposite reason. All are acting cautiously. Each of them is trying to strengthen its position without crossing a visible red line, but at the same time, they don't want to fall behind. Rusko is boosting its northern capabilities, claiming it's only to defend its territory. Jongwo is entering Greenland through the economy, but emphasizes the civilian nature of its projects. The United States maintains a presence it has had for decades and claims it's just continuity. Every step is justifiable on its own. The problem arises only when we look at them together. In such an environment, what individual actors declare stops being important. What matters is how others interpret their actions. What seems routine to one person may appear as a change to another. This difference in interpretation creates pressure. Not pressure for conflict, but pressure for a reaction. For the United States, this means they can't remain passive even if they wanted to. Any sign of weakening presence would be read as opening up space for others. For Russia, returning to northern latitudes would be pointless without real influence there. And for China, it's important not to look like a player that gets pushed out right from the start. The result is a situation where no one wants to escalate, but no one can afford to back down. That's a classic mechanism of geopolitical tension. It stems not from aggression, but from fear of losing one's position. And Greenland appears in this mechanism as one of the few fixed points in a space where other certainties are gradually dissolving. That's why it's being discussed more loudly today. Not because it is in immediate danger, but because it is becoming part of an equation in which the great powers are guarding each other's maneuvering space. In these equations, even quiet places soon become sensitive. Greenland isn't intended as insurance. While it may appear to be part of a power struggle today, it's actually more of an insurance policy. No one needs to occupy it today to gain an advantage. It's enough to make sure that no one else controls it. For the United States, Greenland is a point of stability in a region that is changing faster than they are used to. For Russia, it is part of a broader northern region where it is rebuilding its reach. For China, it is a gateway to a region that will become increasingly important in the future. Each of these approaches is different, but they all lead to the same result. Greenland is not out of the game. However, that doesn't mean a conflict is looming. It means that the island has become part of the balance that the great powers keep an eye on. And it is in such situations that strong statements, tough rhetoric, and political pressure arise. Not because someone wants to act immediately, but because they want to keep room for maneuver in the future. So when Donald Trump talks about Russia and China in connection with Greenland, he's not talking about an invasion. He mentioned losing exclusivity, about the fact that an area that was clearly defined for decades is starting to fill up. And in geopolitics, this is exactly the moment when even quiet places come into the spotlight. Greenland hasn't changed. What has changed is who now thinks they can't ignore it.
If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a like, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones I'm working on. You can support my work through a donation. To help the video reach more people, please share. Thanks.